Wraith of Injustice by Sarah J. Nilsson. This is the true story surrounding the death of Heidi Sue Dowland, born November 18, 1980, and tragically killed in a plane crash on January 13, 2019. Wraith of Injustice portrays the haunting and destructive consequences of injustice in the aftermath of the death of Heidi Sue Dowland. A wraith is a ghost that persists. Episode 7: Probate Problems. For the probate of Heidi Sue Dowland's estate, we find ourselves in the Superior Court of the State of Arizona in Yavapai County. It is now but a few weeks after Heidi was killed in the plane crash with Christopher Adam Anderson at the controls. Not only did she just bury her daughter Heidi on January 2019, but now her mother, Sue Ellen Morgan, had to apply to be the personal representative of her daughter's estate. Maya, as Heidi's daughter, had priority, but she signed a renunciation of right to appointment, leaving Sue Ellen to bravely take on this duty on February 12, 2019. Chris Dowland, on behalf of his two minor children, Logan and Dustin, consented, and Sue Ellen proceeded with her court-required training to be a non-licensed fiduciary. Sue Ellen immediately filed a motion to compel Christopher Anderson to turn over Heidi's assets. Ryan K. Hodges became Sue Ellen's counsel, while Hans Klugson became Anderson's. A scheduling conference was set on May 20, 2019. It lasted 4 minutes. At this point, Anderson had in his possession Heidi's truck and a motorcycle that had to be turned over to Sue Ellen. On July 17, 2019, a joint stipulated motion to set a judicial settlement conference was filed. Sue Ellen and Anderson were contesting several parts of Heidi's estate. The range of disputes extended to Heidi's children. This judicial settlement conference was to avoid lengthy litigation. On August 1, 2019, the Honorable David L. Mackey ordered a settlement conference for October 23rd of 2019, allotting a half a day to resolve these issues. Anderson had made a claim for $65,000 against Heidi's estate. Pursuant to ARS 143806, on August 26, 2019, Sue Ellen filed a notice of disallowance. Among other things, Anderson claimed that Heidi was liable for his injuries in the aircraft accident on January 13, 2019, and her estate owed him damages for that, for a plane he made her buy him, and a plane he flew on the day of the crash, a crash he caused by failing to secure the fuel caps after allegedly refueling in Kingman Airport. Gene Gardner retained counsel, Anderson PLLC, and made a claim for $43,409.18 against Heidi's estate. Pursuant to ARS 143806, on August 26, 2019, Sue Ellen filed a notice of disallowance. Apparently, Gene Gardner sold the property in Meadview to Anderson in May 2015, but in order to avoid listing it in his 2017 bankruptcy proceeding, he transferred it to Heidi on March 24, 2016. This is evidenced by the recording of the deed from Gene Gardner, and also this deed recorded by Heidi. On September 17, 2019, the Honorable David L. Mackey moved the settlement conference up to October 15, 2019, due to a scheduling conflict on the original date of October 23rd. What was the outcome of the settlement conference on October 15, 2019? Well, Heidi's place in Meadview was to be returned to Anderson, who would satisfy his obligation to Jean Gardner, who would then release her claim on Heidi's estate. Heidi's Farm Bureau life insurance would be paid to Heidi's estate and not Anderson. But Anderson got to keep the global life insurance policy, the boat, and the Chevy Blazer. Anderson had to pay Sue Ellen $20,000 and relinquish all claims to the estate. However, in return, Sue Ellen had to give up her right to sue Anderson for the wrongful death of her daughter Heidi in the plane crash that Anderson caused. Based on the settlement agreement of October 15, the Honorable David L. Mackey ordered Farm Bureau life insurance policy for Heidi Sue Dowland in the amount of $250,000 be paid to her estate for her children and not for Anderson. On October 21st, 2019, Christopher Dowland, Heidi's ex-husband and father of her children, was appointed conservator to her youngest son, Dustin, who was only 12 at the time of her death. Sue Ellen signed over the deed to the property in Meadview on January 8, 2020. And Anderson promptly turned it over in April of 2020 to Alan and Aletha Anderson, husband and wife. Could these be Anderson's parents? Heidi's estate was then divided up in thirds, with a third going to each of her children. Heidi's daughter Maya received her share on January 29, 2020. Her oldest son Logan received his share on March 10, 2020. Heidi's ex-husband and the father of her children, Chris Dowland, served as conservator for Dustin, who was only 12 at the time of his mother's death. Chris Dowland signed for Dustin's share on June 2nd, 2020. On April 1st, 2024, Dustin, having reached the age of majority on March 10, received his inheritance from his father, Chris Dowland, who had been his conservator since 2019. On January 29, 2020, Sue Ellen Morgan, having performed admirably all of her duties as personal representative for her daughter Heidi's estate, is released by the court and the case is closed. Stay tuned for Episode 8, USA vs. Anderson, where yet another court case ensues, this time in federal court, and this time for the crimes committed by Anderson that resulted in Heidi's death.